So this one's a little bit generic, so bear with me because there's a few things I want to say, so I might kind of amalgamate it all together. So it's just general thoughts really right now. I've just been looking through some of the press because I got a lot of newspapers for the general election, both on the right and the left. And I, more often than not, buy newspapers I actually deeply dislike. That may sound a bit strange, and it may even make me a bit of a hypocrite. And I fully acknowledge that. I'm probably a hypocrite for doing that. So, for example, The Sun and the Daily Mail, I can't stand, but I still buy them. My rationale being, you may know, if you followed this channel, I collect newspapers. Because what's happening is the print press is going on to online formats. So I sort of see it as historical archives in a sense. So I get titles I personally dislike just as a kind of record, as an archive of, yeah, that was how they reported it then. I got the last ever edition of News of the World. Um, but anyway, looking through the Daily Mail kind of made me think of how powerful the tabloids can be in terms of their narrative. I mean, a lot of the sort of reporting that you see in the tabloids really belongs in the gutter, in my opinion. What passes for professional journalism more often than not is just ad hominem attacks and vindictive, nasty, spiteful, sensationalistic sort of approaches. Having said that, journalism isn't an easy profession. It requires a lot of research. It requires meeting deadlines. Journalists have to work very hard, even whether that be on tabloids or so-called quality papers. So part of me has a grudging respect for them as well. Whilst I deeply dislike the sort of pitch that a lot of tabloid hacks come out with, and I do think there is a profound arrogance, particularly with the Daily Mail, um, where they play judge, jury, and executioner. The earlier when I called into the Nick Ferrari show, I think I probably got a good balance. If you listened to the show, you would have heard me. I think I probably got a good balance, but I wonder was I maybe a little bit too passive? Should I have been a bit more robust? Because Ferrari actually admitted that he had sent people out. I don't know if he'd been a newspaper editor before, but he admitted, because I brought up doorstepping, he admitted that he had sent out journalists to do doorstepping as a technique because it was, as he argued, the only way to get interviews with a politician. I rebuked that it was unfair on their families. I mean, I hate doorstepping as a technique, and I did say on his show it's paparazzi esque, and to the public it looks aggressive, and I think he kind of took that on board. But I wonder, should I have been a bit more robust to really demonstrate how much I hate it? I don't know. But the point is, I raised the issue, and I'm pleased that I did because a lot of people listen to LBC, so maybe it gave people, it's a much bigger audience than I've got here. So if by mentioning that, it maybe gets some people thinking a little bit, it's not a bad thing. Um, what I think is very important, I mean, electorally, the Tories have done very well. There's no question about that. But it would be a big mistake for anyone to think that that suddenly means that the British people have this swing to the right in terms of the thinking. No doubt the Brexit issue was a major factor, and it's almost becoming stale now. But the point being is, a lot of people voted because they wanted to get Brexit done. It's not because they necessarily agree with the Tories ideologically. Voting is not a black and white thing. People vote for a range of reasons, and the Prime Minister himself acknowledged this. So I think there's probably a 50-50 dynamic in this country overall. I mean, if you add the Labour and Liberal Democrat votes together, it's almost exactly even. Both Tories on one hand, Liberal Democrat and Labour on the other, if you add them together, is about 13.9 million votes, roughly speaking, on both sides. Then if you add the SNP to Labour and Lib Dem, given that the SNP are a centre left party in social areas, that's another 1.2 million. Then you get over 14 million for the left wing votes. If you add, I believe it was 600,000 or 700,000 for the Brexit Party. What I'm driving at is if you add the votes together of the broad dynamic of left and right, it's roughly equal. If anything, the left have a slightly higher total sum. But of course, in our system, it's first past the post, so that's kind of irrelevant. But it just the reason I mention it is conservatives shouldn't think that the British people have suddenly switched to a conservative way of thinking. And smug editors at the Daily Mail and co shouldn't think that either, because that isn't what's happened. And looking at some of the pieces in the Daily Mail, you would think that they've had some sort of big revolution. I don't think that is what happened. I think it's more that people have voted against Jeremy Corbyn than for Boris Johnson. And I think Johnson himself recognises this. So I think in a democracy it's extremely important to have a left right pendulum. And right now it's extremely important to have a left wing opposition. I take issue with the left in many areas. Their political correctness, their identity politics, and their attitude to crime and justice. On that, I would be well to the right. And I have no problem admitting that socially. I'm very conservative when it comes to crime. But I still think it is important to have a left wing voice out there to challenge the Tories and to challenge the right on issues like the unfairness of the DWP and the way it treats claimants. On areas of social compassion, um, the fact of the matter is rough sleeping has risen under the Tories. Food banks have risen under the Tories. And Daily Mail columnists, I think, don't give a damn about stuff like this. One or two of them might, but I think ultimately conservative commentators don't really care about the most vulnerable in society. And I could be wrong about that, but that's my gut feeling. So I get quite angry with the sort of survival of the fittest mentality that the right have. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, but my basis for that is pretty much that conservative thinking is, well, if the rich do well, then so will everyone else. Or let me put it another way, because rich sounds a bit generic. If business does well, if big CEOs do well, if big companies do well, then it'll trickle down and everyone will do well. But we know that isn't true. I mean, look at a company like Amazon, which is, a multi-billion multinational company. Some of the horror stories that have come out from Amazon, and to be fair to the Daily Mail here, they will occasionally feature human interest stories like this. So they're not always kind of to the right. They will occasionally feature human interest stories that damn the right as well. But anyway, that's an example of the disgusting sort of exploitation that can go on. Now, that is not a good promotion of business doing well. That's an example of big business exploiting people that cannot defend themselves, and it is just wrong, whatever way you gloss it over. So the more left wing side of me hates that sort of situation, and I hate the fact that the likes of Rupert Murdoch and his empire still has a pretty big influence on our democracy. I don't know how many people will have voted one way or the other because of newspaper influence. I suspect perhaps the influence of the press can be overstated. And I've been guilty of that myself. Sometimes I overestimate how powerful they are. I mean, even the most powerful tabloids, The Sun and the Daily Mail, um, most people in the country don't actually read them. Although they're among the best selling tabloids, the Metro has just surpassed The Sun. Most people, if you actually look at the figures, so let's say, for example, 3.5 million copies of The Sun are sold, I forget the precise figure, but it's something like that. Now, let's say the circulation's a bit higher because someone could buy The Sun and then several members of their family will read it. So let's say 10 million people, right? Well, we have a population of 66 million. So for those like myself who often find a bad taste in their mouths from the sort of pitch that the tabloids take, we have to remember most people don't actually read them. So, I mean, you could look at it this way: more people voted for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour than read the Sun. That's a way to look at it. So, you know, that's one thing I love about our democracy, the fact that nothing is quite black and white. If you consider a country like China, and this is an obvious example because it's a powerful country, I could give other examples, Eritrea, but China is it's a powerful country. It's a rival. So in China, you have a choice: communist, communist, or communist. The entire media is controlled by the Communist Party. You don't get to vote except at village level, and then they're kind of approved by the provincial party. So there's pretty much no room for dissent whatsoever. Sure, you'll get kind of debates online, but it's all within the system. Um, so when I contrast that with our system, yes, there are things that really work me up sometimes. The arrogance of our tabloids can be insufferable. And you might argue with our politicians, although I would suggest that the dynamic with politicians is more controlled because we are democracy. I just don't. I mean, they have to pander to the press and they have to pander to the public, so it's a different dynamic. One of the callers after me on the Nick Ferrari show actually berated Nick Ferrari for the other reason. He claimed that the media weren't being tough enough on politicians. I don't agree with that. I would suggest in the last few decades there's been a sort of gotcha style narrative whereby journalists are jumping over themselves to kind of show how tough they are. I would suggest that's the situation. But anyway, opinions. We all have them. I do think it would be refreshing to have a party leader or a political party that doesn't really care what the tabloids think of them. Um, but people also need to remember we as voters all have a responsibility to really think for ourselves. And I do think a lot of people don't spend enough time when they vote. I'm not saying they should agree or disagree with me, but when you actually listen to the reasons, people come out with these sweeping statements like, "Oh, I can't be bothered. They're all the same." It just proves that they're not actually paying attention. That does irritate me because every vote matters. So when people say things like, they make sweeping statements one way or the other. Oh, I'm not voting for Boris because, well, he's a racist, isn't he? But then when they're pushed on it, and the LBC hosts often do this, they'll push people on these sort of sweeping statements, so fair play to them for that. They can't really follow it up. I mean, a guy the other day said Corbyn has told lies as long as his arm, but he couldn't actually give an example. So it's good that the LBC hosts will hold people to account on those sweeping statements. A woman called into the Matt Stadlin show shortly before I did, and she claimed that Corbyn had never done a day's work in his life, which, to his credit, Matt Stadling corrected her. He said, well, look, whatever you think of his politics, this man has been travelling around the country thousands of miles, giving speeches, attending debates, and trying to win over voters. So this kind of sweeping nonsense that, oh, they've never done a hard day's work in their life. You can dislike the politics, but I think that's it's just a bit of a lazy smear, to be quite honest. I think a lot of voters, you know, I don't want to sound snobbish here, but a lot of people, I think, don't spend enough time on their vote. And I'm not talking about people who disagree with me. I've come across people whose opinions I profoundly disagree with, but they're still principled. They're still going by what they believe. What does trouble me, though, is I think there are a lot of people who don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. To me, it's not something to be thrown around. I think a vote really, really matters, and I would implore people for the next election, council elections, whatever it is, think about it. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that that is very widespread. I'm just saying that I have seen examples of that. And you know this because of the sort of rationale that people give. Well, I don't really like the look of them, or like, the Vox Pop, people saying, oh, Tim, isn't it? Corbyn. Then when they're followed up, why? Oh, just because it is. I mean, I'm critical of Corbyn. I know why I'm critical of Corbyn. So that irritates me a bit when people are so blasé about their vote that they just kind of, you just know they're not thinking about it. So that's a bit of a problem. Anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts. It's very, very important that there is a left wing voice out there that doesn't pander to the likes of the Daily Mail and the Sun and the Daily Express. Um, I can't remember if it was Andy Burnham or one of the other senior Labour figures said they were not going to care what the likes of the Sun thought of them or their party. And that resonates with me because it indicates they're not scared of standing up to these tabloid bosses. That's a good thing, in my opinion, because ultimately the politicians are there to serve the people, not to serve the tabloids. So Fleet Street editors can have whatever the narrative they want, but people, although I don't think it's a case that people are that easily led by the press, it would be wrong to say that there's no influence there whatsoever. So um, I also don't think there's anything wrong with politicians fighting back. It doesn't mean they're attacking a free media. It just means they're defending themselves. I mean, if I was leading a party and I thought that particular critique was just plain wrong, factually, or it was just unfair, I would say so. I wouldn't shy away from that. And I think one problem with Corbyn actually was he was too timid. I mean, people say he was a decent man, but I think that it's not. I don't actually think he was weak in the sense of on a personal level. I think any party leader at that level would need by default to have tough skin. And for a man of 70, I think Corbyn had a lot of energy. I don't think he was personally necessarily weak in that sense. It's more that he was weak as a leader. I mean, he wasn't vocal enough in some of his principles. It just seemed, frankly, like a timid old man. And I hate saying that, but that's how he came across at times. Let me know your thoughts. We need a left right pendulum, and yeah, the centre as well. I'm a centrist. But definitely it is important that there is a voice out there that speaks out against the sort of conservative narrative you see from powerful tabloids. And I am all for those tabloids being mercilessly criticised. They think it's fine for them to do it. They say, oh, it's free press, we can have this narrative. Well, I say it's fine for others, public figures or otherwise, to say, well, I happen to think that's a vindictive, nasty rag. So, let me know your thoughts.